Have you ever looked at a beautiful garden and wondered why it somehow looks more polished, organized, and expensive than yours, even when the plants are practically the same? The secret may not be the flowers, vegetables, or fancy garden furniture. Sometimes it is something much simpler: the edging. A clean garden edge can completely transform the way a growing space looks. It separates pathways from planting beds, keeps mulch where it belongs, defines borders, and gives the entire garden a finished appearance. And today, we're going to show you 10 no-dig garden edging ideas that can create that expensive, professionally designed look without requiring a major construction project. Welcome back to Fresh Homegrown Harvest, where we make gardening practical, beautiful, and achievable. If you love the idea of improving your garden without spending a fortune or spending your entire weekend digging trenches, stay with us, because these ideas are designed to be simple, affordable, and surprisingly effective. Some use materials you may already have around your property, while others turn inexpensive materials into borders that look far more luxurious than they actually cost. Before we get into the ideas, there is one important thing to understand about no-dig edging. No-dig does not necessarily mean you simply throw something onto the ground and walk away. The goal is to minimize excavation and avoid creating a large trench or permanently disturbing the soil. You are creating a visual and functional boundary while working with the existing landscape. Depending on the material you choose, you may need to level the surface, remove a few weeds, or secure the edging so it stays in place. But compared to traditional edging methods, the work can be dramatically easier. And the first idea is one of the simplest and one of the most underrated. Number 1, natural stone edging. Natural stones can make a garden look instantly established. There's something about irregular stones arranged along a vegetable bed or flower border that creates the feeling of an old, carefully designed garden. The best part is that you don't necessarily need perfectly matching landscaping stones. Look around your property first. You may already have stones that can be used. Small field stones, rounded river rocks, flat stones, or pieces collected from previous landscaping projects can all become attractive edging materials. The secret is not making every stone identical. Instead, arrange them intentionally. Place larger stones at visual anchor points and smaller stones between them. Keep the line relatively consistent, but allow a little natural variation. This creates an organic appearance rather than something that looks overly manufactured. Natural stone is particularly beautiful around raised vegetable beds, herb gardens, cottage gardens, and pathways. It can also help hold mulch back from a lawn or walkway. And because stone doesn't rot like wood, it can remain useful for many seasons. You can take this idea one step further by choosing stones that complement your existing landscape. If your garden already contains warm-colored materials, choose stones with similar earthy tones. If you have a more modern garden, flatter stones arranged in a clean line can create a sleek appearance. The expensive look comes from consistency. You don't need the most expensive stone, you need a deliberate arrangement. Number 2, brick edging without digging. Brick is another material that can make an ordinary garden border look surprisingly sophisticated. But instead of digging a deep trench and permanently installing the bricks, you can create a simple surface-level border. Old bricks are especially useful for this project. Weathered bricks can actually look better than brand new ones because they immediately give the garden character. You can place them end-to-end along a bed, arrange them side by side to create a wider border, or position them diagonally for a more decorative effect. The key is creating a reasonably level surface first. If the ground is extremely uneven, the bricks may wobble or create gaps. A small amount of surface preparation can make a huge difference. Try using the same brick style throughout one section of the garden. Repetition creates visual structure. You could surround a vegetable bed with reclaimed red brick, for example, while using another material elsewhere. And here's a little design trick. Straight brick lines tend to create a formal appearance, while gently curved brick borders create a softer cottage garden feeling. You can choose the look based on your garden style. You're not trying to build a wall, you're simply creating a strong visual boundary. Number 3. Large logs or branches. If you want an edging idea that feels natural, inexpensive, and perfectly suited for a productive backyard garden, look at fallen branches and small logs. Branches can create rustic borders around vegetable beds, flower gardens, and pathways. They're especially useful if you want your garden to have a woodland, cottage, or naturalized appearance. Instead of cutting everything into perfectly identical pieces, embrace some variation. Lay several branches along the edge of the bed, overlap them slightly, and use shorter pieces to fill obvious gaps. For a more substantial border, use small logs placed end to end. You can also stack 2 layers if the materials are stable and appropriate for your garden. There's one thing to remember with untreated wood. It will eventually decompose, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad choice. In fact, the changing appearance can become part of the garden. As the wood ages, it blends more naturally into the landscape. Avoid using wood that's been treated with substances unsuitable for garden use, especially around edible crops. When in doubt, choose clean, untreated natural wood. This is a perfect example of how the expensive look doesn't always come from expensive materials. It comes from making the materials feel intentional. Number 4. Gravel and stone ribbon edging. Here's an idea that can make a garden look incredibly polished. Create a narrow ribbon of gravel between the lawn and your planting bed. Instead of using one obvious border material, you create a transition zone. Imagine a vegetable bed, then a narrow strip of small decorative gravel, followed by the lawn or pathway. That little strip can make the entire garden look more professionally designed. The gravel also creates a visual contrast between different areas. Dark soil beside green grass can sometimes look unfinished. A defined gravel strip provides a deliberate separation. Choose gravel that complements the surrounding landscape. You can use small, rounded stones for a softer appearance or angular gravel for a more modern look. The most important part is keeping the gravel contained. If it gradually spreads into the lawn, the crisp appearance can disappear. A subtle border material underneath or along the sides can help maintain the separation. This approach works particularly well around raised beds, pathways, patios, and ornamental planting areas. And you don't need a huge amount. Sometimes a narrow strip is enough to create the effect. Number 5. Upside-down terracotta pots. This idea is perfect if you have old or mismatched terracotta pots that are no longer useful as containers. Instead of throwing them away, you can turn them into decorative garden edging. One approach is to place pots upside down in a continuous line along the garden border. Another is to partially position them along the edge and use them as repeated visual accents. You can even combine pots of slightly different sizes for a more relaxed appearance. Terracotta works beautifully because its warm, earthy color complements green plants. It also looks especially good in vegetable gardens, herb gardens, Mediterranean-style landscapes, and cottage gardens. If you have broken terracotta pots, the pieces can sometimes be incorporated into decorative borders as well. But make sure sharp edges are positioned safely and away from areas where people or animals could easily come into contact with them. The goal is to turn something that might otherwise be considered garden waste into a design feature. Number 6. Reclaimed pavers. Old concrete pavers, patio pieces, and leftover landscaping blocks can become excellent no-dig edging. This is where you should start thinking like a garden designer rather than simply looking for traditional edging products. Maybe you have several leftover pavers sitting behind a shed. Perhaps someone nearby is replacing a patio and has old pieces they no longer need. Instead of seeing those materials as useless, imagine them as a border. Lay them flat along the perimeter of a garden bed,
You can create a wide walking strip around a vegetable bed or simply use a single row to define the boundary. One advantage is that pavers create strong, clean lines. If you want your garden to look organized and modern, this is one of the easiest approaches. Try not to mix too many unrelated materials in one small area. If you use concrete pavers, repeat that material elsewhere so the garden feels connected. A cohesive garden often looks more expensive than a garden filled with expensive but unrelated features.
Number 7. Recycled pallet wood edging. Old pallet boards can sometimes be transformed into simple garden borders, provided the wood is suitable for reuse and free from concerning treatments or contamination. You can cut boards into shorter sections and place them along the edge of a garden bed. Rather than building a tall fence, keep the edging relatively low. The rustic appearance works especially well in vegetable gardens because it reinforces that practical, homemade feeling. You can leave the wood natural, or if you choose to finish it, use a product appropriate for the intended outdoor application and avoid questionable chemicals around edible growing areas. One of the best things about wood edging is how easy it is to customize. You can create street sections, gentle curves, or even alternating heights. But remember, you are not trying to create a fortress around your vegetables. The purpose is simply to define the space. If you have a small garden, even a few boards can make a dramatic difference. Number 8. Living plant edging. Now, this idea is completely different because the border itself is alive. Instead of using a hard material, you can create an edging line with compact plants. Low-growing herbs, flowers, or suitable ground cover plants can form a living boundary between different sections of your garden. This approach can make the garden feel softer and more natural than traditional hard edging. For an edible garden, consider plants that serve more than one purpose. Some herbs can provide fragrance, attract beneficial insects, or supply ingredients for the kitchen. However, choose carefully. You do not want an aggressive spreading plant taking over your vegetable beds. The ideal living edging plant should stay relatively compact, tolerate the conditions in that part of the garden, and remain manageable. This approach can be particularly beautiful around raised beds because it softens the hard lines of the structure. Imagine a row of vegetables surrounded by a low border of flowering plants. Suddenly, the vegetable garden doesn't just look productive, it looks designed. And that's one of the biggest lessons in garden design. Useful spaces can also be beautiful. Number 9. Mulch with a clean, defined border. Sometimes the cheapest edging is no edging material at all. Instead, you can create a clean boundary by carefully shaping your mulch. This is useful if you want a natural appearance and do not want to introduce another material into the landscape. Start by defining the edge between your planting bed and the surrounding lawn or pathway. Then spread your mulch evenly inside the bed. The contrast between the dark mulch and green grass can create a surprisingly polished appearance. The important part is maintenance. Grass can gradually creep into the bed, and mulch can spread outward. A quick cleanup every so often keeps the boundary looking intentional. You can also create gentle curves. Curved beds often make smaller gardens feel more interesting because the eye naturally follows the line. Do not make the curves overly complicated. A simple, smooth curve usually looks better than a series of awkward bends. This technique proves that a professional-looking garden is often more about clean lines than expensive materials. Number 10. Mixed material edging. Our final idea may be the most creative of all. Combine materials. Instead of choosing between stone, brick, wood, gravel, or plants, you can carefully combine 2 or 3 materials to create a unique edging. For example, imagine a vegetable bed surrounded by a narrow gravel strip with natural stones placed at intervals. Or picture a wooden border softened by low-growing flowers. You could even combine old bricks with small river stones. But there's a rule here: less is more. If you combine too many colors, textures, and materials, the garden can start to look chaotic instead of expensive.
Choose one dominant material and one supporting material. Repeat those materials in other parts of the garden whenever possible. For example, if you use natural stone around your main vegetable bed, consider using a few of the same stones near your pathway. This repetition makes the whole landscape feel connected. And you can use the same principle with colors. A garden with a limited palette often looks more sophisticated than one containing every material and color available.
Now, before you start building any of these borders, there are a few mistakes you should avoid. The first is making the edging too complicated. Remember, the purpose of edging is to define a space. If you spend hours creating an elaborate border that becomes difficult to maintain, you may eventually regret it. The second mistake is choosing a material that does not suit your garden. A formal stone border may look strange in a very wild natural garden, while rustic branches may not fit a sleek modern landscape. There is no universally perfect edging. The best option is the one that complements the style you already have. The third mistake is forgetting about maintenance. Ask yourself, what happens when grass grows? What happens when you mow? Can you easily remove weeds? Will mulch wash over the border during heavy rain? Will the material shift? A beautiful garden border that is impossible to maintain is not really a good garden border. The fourth mistake is spending money before looking around. Walk around your property, check the shed, look behind the garage, look at leftover bricks, stones, branches, old pots, pavers, and usable timber. You may already have everything you need. And if you do need to purchase something, calculate how much you actually need before buying. A narrow border can often create the visual effect you want without requiring a huge quantity of material. Another important consideration is safety. Make sure edging does not create dangerous trip hazards along frequently used paths. Avoid sharp, exposed edges, unstable objects, and materials that can shift unexpectedly. If children or pets use the garden, think about their movement through the space as well. And remember, a garden should be beautiful but functional. Now imagine taking one ordinary vegetable bed and applying what we have discussed. You start with an undefined patch of soil. You create a smooth, intentional outline. You add a simple border of reclaimed brick. Inside the bed, you organize the vegetables into clear growing sections. You add a layer of mulch. Then perhaps you place a few natural stones around the corners. Suddenly, the same garden looks completely different. You did not buy an expensive garden structure. You did not install elaborate landscaping. You simply created definition. That is the power of edging. It tells the eye where one space ends and another begins. It makes the garden easier to organize. It can help contain mulch and soil. It can help mowing around planting areas easier. And perhaps most importantly, it makes your garden feel intentional. For a productive garden like the ones we talk about here at Fresh Homegrown Harvest, that matters. Because a vegetable garden does not have to look messy simply because it's producing food. You can grow tomatoes, peppers, beans, lettuce, herbs, carrots, onions, and other crops while still creating a beautiful landscape. In fact, a well-designed edible garden can become one of the most attractive parts of your property. And the best part is that you do not need to complete everything at once. Choose one garden bed. Pick one edging idea. Try it. Live with it for a few weeks. See how it handles rain, watering, mowing, weeds, and everyday garden activity. If it works, repeat the style somewhere else. This gradual approach is much better than trying to redesign the entire garden in one weekend. Your garden is a living space. It changes constantly. Plants grow, seasons change, mulch breaks down, paths shift, edging gets weathered, and that's perfectly normal. The goal is not to create a garden that looks artificial and frozen in time. The goal is to create a garden that feels cared for. So whether you choose natural stone, reclaimed bricks, branches, gravel, terracotta pots, pavers, wood, living plants, mulch, or a combination of materials, remember that the material itself is only half the story. The arrangement is what creates the finished appearance. Keep your lines intentional. Repeat materials. Avoid unnecessary clutter. Think about maintenance. And, most importantly, use what makes sense for your space. You might discover that the garden materials you already have are more than enough to create something beautiful. So, which of these 10 no-dig edging ideas would you try first? Would you go for the natural look of stones and branches? Would you choose reclaimed bricks for a classic appearance? Or would you create a living border with useful plants? Let us know in the comments because your idea might inspire another gardener watching this video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to Fresh Homegrown Harvest for more practical gardening ideas, growing tips, garden design inspiration, and simple ways to get more from your growing space. Remember, you don't need an enormous budget to create a beautiful garden. Sometimes all you need is a little creativity, a few materials you already have, and the willingness to look at an ordinary space differently. Because the garden of your dreams might not be waiting at the garden center. It might already be sitting in your backyard, waiting for you to give it a better edge.